Hello, superheroes of the project management world. Welcome to Project Insight's Professional Development Series. Today, we have a guide for project managers on how to make effective decisions under pressure. Whether you're tuning in from the highest skyscrapers or from that home base, get ready to power up your project management skills. A few housekeeping items. All participants will be on mute. Questions can be asked via chat. This training is good for one PDU. You must stay until the end of the session in order to scan the code. And you'll be sent the PDU before the end of the week. This webinar will be accessible via this recording as well. Before we get into it, let me introduce our experts. First, we have Steve West, the Superman of project management strategy. Steve is the CEO and founder of Project Insight and has helped thousands of organizations make their world a little bit easier via project management. Project Insight is an award-winning online project management tool. Our vision is to automate your work, unify your data, and make your life easier. If you're not currently using our platform, please reach out. We'd love to work with you. Alongside Steve, we have Diane Buckley-Alwis, the Wonder Woman of milestones. Diane is a seasoned PMP and author and directs core performance concepts. As always, we're really great to be learning from you guys. How are you doing?
Doing great. Hi, Steve. Hi, Matt.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this because decision making is one of the most difficult things I think in project management to do. So it's a great topic to discuss.
And yeah, nobody likes to make decisions, or a lot of people don't like to make decisions, but the reality is that we have to, right? Mm-hmm. And and that's where we're going to start today. So hi everybody, and welcome to our webinar. And when we talk about decision making in the context of managing projects, for us to deliver a project successfully, we have to solve problems, right? That's why we're doing it. And to solve problems, we have to make some decisions. And it's not always easy, and they're not always, one size doesn't always fit all. So today we're going to talk about, some of those options, give you some ideas, give you some tools, talk through some scenarios, and we're love to hear people's comments and experiences via the chat. So where we want to start is, we said to solve problems, we have to make decisions. And part of problem solving is looking at alternatives, choosing between many different alternatives, then actually doing something, right? And then ultimately you're going to get a result. So if we don't make decisions, we never get to results. So, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're clear here on is, our job as project managers and people that work on projects is to solve those problems. So our job is to make decisions, and they're not always easy. There's a lot of different obstacles in getting and having some effective problem solving. I can't talk today. Some of the things that you probably see out there is people jumping to the solution. How many times you in a conference call and you say, hey, we have this problem, and somebody just kind of jumps in and says, I know what it is. This is what it is. And then they start focusing on that right away without looking at any alternatives or alternative solutions for that problem.
Well, it happens all the time.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is just the, people's nature. Mm-hmm. They have a gut feel. They think they know what the problem is, and they want to start doing something about it. But it really depends on what we're trying to solve for. It really depends on the criticality of that problem. And, sometimes the best thing to do is kind of step back a little bit and not react. And I know we've had conversations in several other of our webinars, like if you're in a meeting and an issue pops up, is that the most important issue to be working on right now?
Well, right? That is a decision also, definitely.
Right. Yeah. Right. So we want to make sure that we're following a process to be able to get to good decision making so we can solve the problems. And we want to make sure we're looking for root causes, and we want to make sure that we're not, going after the wrong thing. And if you look at this last bullet, sometimes this happens too, inaction, because people are just overwhelmed.
And then I think another thing is that sometimes new problems come in and you lose focus on decisions you just made maybe a week or two earlier. You see that all the time. It's really not uncommon to feel like, oh, let's get on this right now, but you can lose focus on prior decisions.
Right. And if we don't put the appropriate time into identifying the problem, looking at the alternatives, and making a decision as to where we're going together, then you're going to end up with a very a reactionary environment, and nobody's going to feel good about it. And we will make mistakes. We
Yeah,
might
and we're gonna ask the audience what kind of things make it hard for a project manager to make a decision.
Yeah.
So
There you go.
Yeah.
So just to kind of talk through a very simplified process. So the time that you spend in this process will vary greatly from problem to problem. But the first thing you got to do is define that problem. Figure out what you're trying to accomplish to solve that problem. And that's an interesting one, because this is where the scope creep comes into play. Look at different alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, and then make decisions. And again, like I said, the amount of time you spend in this process will be dependent on the criticality of the problem. So this chart just kind of depicts, kind of that thought process of, if I have something that's low in criticality, do I need to spend much time on it? If it's high in criticality, maybe I should spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah.
So like in that whole Starliner, we were talking about that the other day. So, you got people that have been sent into space,
right?
And there's a problem, right? So how much time should we spend on that, Steve?
Well, the livelihood of the astronauts is at stake, so they're taking their time, obviously. And what's funny is that the public is criticizing them because, I don't know, that's what we do these days, I guess. But the fact that they had a place to go in space to just hang out, actually offered the time and the investment for Boeing to research their problem. And obviously it's not, they keep making a decision to not decide to come back, or I guess that is a decision to research more. And some alternatives I've heard people talk about, send the Dragon up there, send the Soyuz to bring them back if it becomes something of a safety concern, right?
Right. So that really highlights that when something is really critical to the project, or whatever you're working on, it's really behooves you to take the time, the appropriate amount of time, to make sure you understood what the problem is. Using the Starliner again, they might have thought they understood what the problem was, and they started making some decisions and fixing some stuff, but it wasn't quite where they wanted it before they felt comfortable bringing them back.
Right, and they're testing it on the ground now, so
and they're going through this process every single day, trying to determine. They'll make a decision and they'll work on something, and they'll come back to it. So really, it's important to make sure we're spending the right amount of time on the most important things. Doesn't mean you ignore the low ones. It just, you spend maybe less time on making a decision on those.
Right, and it's not always necessarily, like, critical can also sometimes mean like it might cost you a lot to do something in time, or it might cost you money. So critical sometimes doesn't, that it's a subjective term, but you probably do want to spend a little time quantifying the difference between the different things that you can do there. So
yeah, absolutely. So again, to my point earlier about, when a problem, an issue arises, don't jump to conclusion as to what the problem is. Kind of step back a tad and say, okay, what's the criticality of it? How is it impacting my project? How much time should I spend on it, versus doing knee-jerk reactions and potentially making, a critical mistake.
And sometimes, getting back to that, shouldn't you, I'm just more of a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If maybe the decision is something you're not, as a project manager, you're not the subject matter expert. You might need to have certain kinds of special meetings just with the right staff members. There's also like, do you bring it up to the whole project team or do you just take it to the side? Those are some things I think. What do you think, Diane, are the best
No, I
practices?
think we're going to get into that whole thing because we're going to walk through that whole
Sorry,
process.
I'm ahead of myself.
You're absolutely right, because the first thing we want to do is we have an issue that's popped up, and we need to define what the problem is. So what is the issue that we're dealing with? And again, you don't want to jump to conclusions, but you also have to stay within scope. So I'm going to use a couple examples, in this problem definition process where let's say the first example is I've got a project out there that the goal of the project was to improve efficiency of the operations by 25%. Okay. Let's say you're doing your testing, you're, 3/4 of the way through the project, you've got, implemented the things that you had expected to implement, but you're only seeing a 15% improvement in efficiency. Well, what's the problem? That you're going to ask that question. And I can, if you pull together your team, you can probably have, 15 people come up with 20 different answers, right? So the first thing we have to do is really identify what that problem is. And there's quite a few tools. I'm going to talk through just a couple of those tools right now. And in that example with the efficiencies, we might want to use kind of a root cause analysis, kind of 5 whys tool for that one, because you're expecting to increase the efficiency by 25%. It's only at 15%. And you're like, why? And, maybe it's, the operators aren't following the process the way we defined it. Okay. Why? Well, maybe those operators are, thinking that first step is just too cumbersome and they can skip past it. And, they're just going to keep going because they want to get the steps done faster. That first step takes too long. Well, why? Why are they doing that? And then maybe, because they can. Well, why is that? Well, we didn't put any guardrails in place from a technology standpoint. And if they did follow that step, maybe they would be achieving the 25%. So you could have jumped to the conclusion and say, oh, well, we have to find another way to improve that efficiency. But if we went through the 5 whys, maybe the issue is that they're not following the process. And maybe if we put some technical guardrails in place where they can't bypass that first step, they'd be achieving their 25%. But again, going through that process, trying to identify what the true problem is, you can come up with many different answers, but you want to make sure that everybody's understanding where you're trying to go and you're solving to the scope of the project. You don't need to get to 40%. You're trying to get to 25%.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Variances is another one. We were talking about this, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a party, whether it's building a house or whatever, all of a sudden you're seeing the budget kind of going awry. And so let's say you have a construction project and you're seeing that, oh my God, trend right now is we're going to be, $250,000 over our budget by the time we finish if we continue down this path. Same thing, Steve. You can use you could be tracking your budget, but maybe I need to look at those variances. Maybe is it everything that's kind of trending to be more expensive, or is it just one thing? Like, what is the problem that's causing the project to be over budget? So really paying attention, maybe doing some forensics on your variances is super helpful. We could do that in Project Insight, right?
Yeah, definitely. Or it could be your budget. It could be also just your time or your resources or taking
maybe there
longer
was a
than they should.
40% inflation, but
and that is where a tool can help you, because the tool will help let you see, especially like in Project Insight, there's a health indicator that'll tell you if you're red over budget or yellow over budget or behind schedule, yellow, red, those kinds of things. Sometimes you can just see it, because you're looking at your task list and it's obvious, but there's baked in tools to kind of help you know you have a problem, and that's
You just reminded me of years ago when, things used to like, oh my God, our budget, we're off on our budget. And so the senior management just says, we're cutting 10% of everybody's budget because so that we can stay on track. Well, why are you cutting everybody's budget?
I know.
Right?
Well, maybe it's political or internally political.
Well, that's not finding the real
you're
problem
right.
to solve.
Yeah, it's the easy cut as opposed to diving in and dissecting where the actual issue is.
So are you saying when people do that and that's their strategy, if the executives are just going to cut 10% across all the board, that they're probably not making the best decision?
Yeah, they're not identifying the real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're not identifying the real problem.
Oh, of course.
Right? Delphi technique is another technique where it's about getting experts in. Let's just say you started a new business, let's say it's a bakery or whatever, and everything's going well, the breads and rolls are awesome, but for some reason your cakes are not coming out the way you expect them. Now, maybe you're not the pastry chef, right? So maybe you hire a pastry chef to come in and kind of really help you learn how to do this better, because people aren't buying your cakes and they're not looking good. So you're going to be, what's the problem here? Maybe it's ingredients. I don't know. Maybe it's a broken oven. I've had that before where it's like, it's not necessarily going to the right temperature,
Right.
and you're like, why is everything not cooking well? So bringing in some expertise to help diagnose what the problem is really important as well. So it's another way. So depending on what issues you're being presented, there's lots of different tools to be able to find out what the problem is.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about earlier. If you have a problem you're not familiar with, you're going to pull aside your experts on your team to do that with you.
Yep. Like, I'm not going to diagnose why the infrastructure, wasn't, like there's some bugs out there, right? So I'm going to pull in my experts. And even in a technology project, you may not have the expert on your team. Yeah. You might have somebody that's learning that role and they're having a difficult time kind of finding that root cause or whatever. At a certain point in time, you have to say, well, it does look like it's this, and Sam is spending just too much time trying to figure it out. Let's pull in the expert and let's see if we can help Sam get to the problem a little faster. So identifying the problem is the crux of being able to make good decisions, because if I don't identify the right problem, what am I doing?
You're going to waste your time.
Yeah.
I'm going to waste my time and I'm not going to solve it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is like really critical to be able to identify that problem.
Well, and let's just go talk a little bit one more time. Once you've identified it, then obviously what's the actual impact of this problem? Getting back to your first chart you had with the slope.
Right.
You might think something's a critical problem and then you find out it's not,
Right. Right. I mean, maybe the issue was my oven was broken.
Right.
I got my expert in. They tested the oven. Boom, done. Change out that. All right, you're good to go.
Right.
That was, it didn't take that long. But maybe it was, you bought bad ingredients and then.
Right, and you could end up wasting your resources' time if you didn't define exactly the problem or figure out what the root cause was, and you make an assumption. You could waste several days of your time fixing the wrong thing.
So really, so that's like it's kind of like the crop. Finding that problem is going to make taking the time to find the problem, and the right problem is going to make the whole decision-making process that more efficient. May not make it shorter, but it's going to be efficient, because you're not going to be going down the path of something that and in the wrong path.
Right.
Once you have that problem now identified, now you have to kind of say, to your point, how critical is it? What do I need to do to make it happen? And what do I want the outcome to be? That's why, what are those objectives? So going back to the conversation about, the project that was targeting 25% increase. If the issue was purely that they were skipping past the first step that was going to improve overall efficiency, maybe all we got to do is now put in those guardrails and then retest. So what is my goal? And I'm staying within my scope. I'm not increasing it to 25%. I'm not adding 14 other options. I'm going to say, okay, we're going to work on this one and we're going to try to solve it, and get people to agree on that plan to move forward.
Yeah, or maybe it's like more training or something for the people.
Yeah. I mean, in the short term, maybe it's more training and
or documenting it.
Importance. Yeah.
Sometimes it could be like if in your software product or some kind of software project, it could be, oh, we just have the wrong label on the box, or the box is in the wrong spot and people don't intuitively see it. That kind of thing happens all the time.
Agreed. So what is it? You want to identify what it is that the problem, once you solve the problem that you're going to achieve, what objectives are you going to achieve once the problem is solved? Then there's going to be alternatives. How do I get there? Right? We'll use that example. I could do more training for those folks so that they don't skip past that first process. I can put technological guardrails in place so they can't skip past that process. There's definitely options, but to talk about alternatives, you want everybody on the same page with what are we trying to solve for, right? Yeah. Otherwise, if you don't have that problem defined and you start talking about alternatives, you're going to have a much larger population of alternatives, all targeting different problems.
Yep.
Right?
Different endpoints for everybody's idea as opposed to a common.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. And of course, this is when your I want to say emotional intelligence, or you just got to allow people to throw those wacky ideas out there and not push back on them, because you never know whether or not something ends up being I'm not thinking of it one way. You might be thinking of it a different way. But guess what? Maybe the three of us together come up with a totally different idea that we wouldn't have thought individually.
Right.
So let people have that brainstorming time. And going to our point about how much time do you spend, again, it's going to come to that criticality. Right. If it's not very critical, you can fail fast a little bit more. If it is critical, you don't want to be failing fast and redoing 15 times. So you have to have that discussion as to how you're going to move forward with it.
Mm-hmm. And don't forget the last one there, which is allowing your subconscious to do that. I actually like that too. If, let's say, it's not urgently important to discuss to make a decision right the second, sometimes the answers reveal themselves later to you, and you don't have to stop and focus on the one problem. You can come back to it in a day later, a couple days later, and that now I know. What to do.
Well, it's that in the shower moment, or like I like to go for walks every morning, and a lot of times those morning walks are just about, all right, what's going on today, and what do I need to solve for today, and kind of clear your head and allow you to kind of your brain just to mull it over. And it's the brain's an amazing thing. It comes up with these ideas too, and it comes up with these solutions. And you might not have thought about it the first time.
Yeah, and we have Jimmy Emmerich in the office in the audience says, 5 times the 5 why seems to be missed with many teams. So she's right about that.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit, and you just got to keep asking those questions. And what I see more often is people wanting to jump to the solution so fast.
Right. You do one of the whys.
No, stop. Let's just keep going, and let's.
But it's just human nature, because you do want to fix it right away, right? But,
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely done that more than I should have.
Yeah, we're all guilty of that, because we all have that gut feel, and sometimes that gut feel is 100% accurate, and sometimes that gut feel doesn't have all the information necessary to have the right idea. And remember, there's always going to be alternatives.
Right.
So like in that example of the 25% to the 15%, you know, maybe the answer also is, you know what, that first step, we thought it was going to be that help us with that additional 10%. But in hindsight, we're like, wow, no, it's really not going to,
Yeah.
you know. So I might have to think of other, I or we might have to think of other solutions to gain the additional percentage efficiencies,
Yeah,
which we may
definitely.
not even talking about at all.
Well, I think also once you have identified your alternatives, you should spend some time thinking about, one alternative might be really inexpensive and one might be really expensive. So
Yeah,
there's some complexity involved in that part of that.
absolutely. And we're going to get to that in about one more slide too. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, no, that's exactly right. So the best way to identify alternatives is stay focused on the how, those objectives that you want to achieve. You might be able to go back into, past projects and kind of get some ideas.
Mhm.
There's also, I like the idea of challenging constraints. Well, we've never done it that way before, right? I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, why? Why haven't we done it that way?
Yeah.
Like I work on this one nonprofit, and their comment was, we've never had to do that before. And I'm like, okay. And most of you all know I live in Tampa, Florida. So what's been going on in the city of Tampa over the last 4 years? Like huge growth,
Mhm.
like way more people. This person has been on this nonprofit for 50 years. Way more people. I'm like, if we don't think about that in a city that's had this growth, then, we have to now, because the city has changed. So challenging those constraints goes to, things do change, and what was common 20 years ago may not be at all common
It
today.
completely irrelevant, in fact. It may
Yeah,
just not even apply at all.
right,
So
right.
staying the course is silly. Yeah.
Right. I always like the what ifs, or I use a term called, wouldn't it be great if,
Mhm.
you just kind of let people wouldn't it be great if we could do A, B, and C, right? Regardless of, you know, any history, or ask the disconfirming questions like, you know, uh, we've always done it this way, or what happens if we never do it that, it's like just kind of just going to the total contrarian opposite in trying to find those alternatives. And again, it does take some maturity in the group to not shut people down, to let them have that conversation. And especially, I mean, we were even talking about, like, remember the movie Apollo 13?
Yep.
If they didn't allow the engineers to take that box of stuff and
Right.
figure out how to make it work, they just totally said, okay, what do I have to work with? And how could I?
Right.
Yeah.
There was no, well, you
Yeah. I
can't
mean,
do
that's that
There's
famous
no
scene
rule. Yeah. Sorry, Steve.
where the filter and they had duct tape or whatever to put this thing together. And then, contrasting that with in the 1960s, you didn't have a space station to go to dock and take your time.
right.
They had to make decisions because the clock was going to tick on them, and they had to it just was highly risky. But
Yep.
that's what they did. But in software too, shifting gears on that, in software, you can do a lot more A/B testing of things. You can try two things at once because sometimes the cost is low to do that.
Correct. Correct.
So it depends on the kind of project you're doing, what the impact might be. But they always talk about software development trying to fail fast, right? Go find out, is
Mhm.
this going to work? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? That's a really valid process sometimes, um, for
Yeah.
something like that.
And to your point about the risks and everything
Mhm.
else, this is where you look at it, two ways. I look at this in two different ways. One is I might have several alternatives. All right. And some of those alternatives will be a high cost, some might be a low cost, some might be more impactful to the goal that you're trying to, and some might be less impactful. So what's the probability of those alternatives helping me solve it? Do I do them all? Or do I do one? Or do I do three of them? I mean, there's a whole conversation about how each of those alternatives can impact positive or negatively the outcomes that you're looking for. And then every single one of those alternatives, the second component of this, potentially has some risk. So you might have some that probability could really help us achieve that 25%. We might be able to get it to 35%, but the cost might be, prohibitive, because you're going to have to spend, X amount of dollars more. You're going to have to get the client's approval to spend that much, so there's risks associated with each of those alternatives as well. So allowing yourself to brainstorm all of those alternatives, look at them individually from the perspective of how impactful are they to the goal, and then what's the residual risk of the project if you do them or you don't do them. So having that whole risk analysis happening is, again, very important. How much time, again, go back, how much time do you spend on this analysis? I mean, it could be a half a day kind of conversation and you walk through all of them. But if I'm on the Starliner, I want them to take their darn time.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I don't want to come back too soon, right?
And those projects, they do those kind of big projects like that. There's definitely risks with their effects and mitigations and all of that going on, because you're talking about life and death, as well as millions and millions of dollars to execute the plan.
Right.
So
Any decision.
the bigger, and like you can use a tool like Project Insight to log all those risks ahead of time or as they go in the project, and use them, because we have that slope, and you can see this chart here. You can do that in our tool as well as finally we're shifting there. So here you see, this is actually the manifestation of that as you enter your risks in here, usually up in the beginning of the project or in the middle. Then you'll see this shows you where your risks are in here. And this is the number, number 10 and number 11 and 3. All you do is you list out what the name of that risk, what the description might be, and what effects that can have. And even in Project Insight, you can actually add mitigations as well. Some of our clients do that, where you can rescore it afterwards.
So from a terminology standpoint, think of it this way. We're talking about alternatives. And remember, and I'm talking to the overall audience here, remember, we have positive risks and we have negative risks, right? So when we're talking about alternatives, those are those positive risks that we're looking at. And you can absolutely use this same, capability that's on Project Insight to assess all those alternatives, because they're opportunities, right? They're just not necessarily negative. They're not negative risks. They're positive risks.
They can, you can definitely do that. And keep, the other benefits of doing it in a tool is you can keep track of them and report on them and borrow them, quickly find them. And we talked about during some decision making, you might want to look at past projects. That's a real quick way, by not having it like buried in your notes in your email or somewhere in a Word file on your network. But if you have all your data in a tool, it makes it easy to find them and go look at past.
And I love that idea, because that's, you're typically the project team is going to be different from project to project, and not everybody's going to have some of those same experiences. So if you can utilize a tool like Project Insight to capture those experiences and have a way to do that research, goes back to, going back to the experts or going back to history and seeing, did we have a similar problem before, and how did we solve it, and how did it work? Did it come, did it solve what we wanted to do? So again, go back up in the helicopter. Don't do your knee-jerk reaction on every single, problem that comes up, but kind of think it through and take the appropriate amount of time to get there.
Yeah, and the other great thing is these kinds of lists in the tool, it makes it easier for you to report out on that to your executives or stakeholders. So you just log it once and then reuse the data because it's online instead of buried somewhere. Like
Awesome.
I think, yeah.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
we can move on.
Sure. All right. Well, we've got all kinds of alternatives, right? And so we have to evaluate those alternatives, which is what we've been talking about. And, using the simplest technique sufficient for the problem. So that's kind of the crux of what we're talking about here, is making sure you're not spending too much time. You're not doing analysis paralysis. I know a lot of organizations that end up doing that. And all analysis paralysis does is it draws out the timeline and you still don't get to the end result you want. Having some sort of objective model is always better than just that gut feel kind of model. And then make a conscious choice. Like I said earlier, you could have, you're going to have multiple alternatives, and you're going to have to say, what can we do within the scope of our project? Maybe we can stretch it a little bit and do a couple options and have some options as to how we get to the solving the problem. But we also don't want to necessarily be pressured by time, convenience, or inexperience. Like, use the right amount of time you need for the complexity and criticality of that problem that we're trying to solve. But once you do, we got to make a decision, right? So here's that chart that Steve was talking through that we have available in Project Insight, and to be able to, prioritize and identify and document, and, from a discipline standpoint, as a project manager, when you do make a decision and you do get a result of that, it's really nice to document the results of how that went so that somebody can use it down the road.
Yeah, and you can do that in our tool as well. With we have a full RAID log, so we showed you the risk matrix, but there's also a decision list along with the issue list and action list. And I am showing that on the other screen, real basic one. You can just add your decisions when they come up, but also, obviously all the fields that you want to they're configurable to have what fields you want to show. But because we also have meeting minutes, you can actually add meeting minutes into your plan, and then while you're conducting that, you can throw your decisions in here as well, along with actions and stuff. So the goal would be that you can use the tool to log when those decisions were made, because otherwise, if you're not using something like this, you're going to be probably sending it out in an email, and we all know that when you send an email out, it's in your inbox for like a day, and then it's buried, and it'll be difficult for you to go back and find, well, what did we say, and when did we say it, and why did we say it? So when you do actually make those decisions, you can log those things. So it can go from risks in the beginning, what we think are going to be some problems that might come up, to once you do the analysis and then finally do make the decision, then you can log those as well.
Well, and then you've got the central place with the whole RAID capabilities where everyone can get to it. All three of us in different locations don't have to remember that I scribbled down this decision on my notepad that we decided, let's go this route. Everybody
it's in Slack somewhere.
Exactly. Teams buried. It's just buried.
All those communication channels, it's like once something comes into the top, then everything else is below it. But yeah, by putting it in the tool, it just becomes another one of the views that you can turn on or off in our tool. If you're going to use risks and issues and actions and decisions, if you want to know what they were, you click on them. Here's the 2 decisions we made on this project so far.
Yeah, and that's a important concept of if you're using a tool like Project Insight, getting the entire project team utilizing it as one of their one of their primary communication methods. A lot of companies, well, I'm just going to get a subscription for just the project managers. Well, that doesn't do us any good. I mean, really, what you really want is to make it a tool that everybody can use from a communication standpoint, because everything we do is communication. And if it's just there for the project manager only, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of the capabilities that it has.
Well, and I'm just going to take it one step further. With Project Insight, we have a client view portal, and so those decisions can also be shared out to the client view, or the meeting minutes, or the task list. So it's 20 years ago, project manager would be the only one doing the documentation, but today it is important for everyone to collaborate. We do it on Facebook all the time, right? We go onto our Instagram, we go into our social media, putting your project online and making it available to everybody. So it's not just, oh, I'll get a report next week. That makes a big difference, and everyone can get involved and be empowered that way.
Yep, agreed.
That decision-making process is full circle then, because the external stakeholders are involved just as heavily if you need them to be. So
and I think transparency is really important, because it'll help you with your overall performance in your projects anyway. So by logging everything online versus separate little buckets and silos all over your network, where I have a spreadsheet of risks, and I have a spreadsheet of decisions, and here's an email, and here's my meeting minutes in the email. All that stuff scattered all over the place is really it seems easy to do it that way. It's like, oh, I have my process, but then no one else can see it. And then it's a lot more work for you later when you're trying to compile what's going on in a big picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and on the audience, there you go. Great comment. Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's probably the hardest thing to do is to, but I think the technology tools and even AI, I could see some good value if you do have disparate systems and leveraging AI to kind of pull some stuff together. That might be a good way to go at some point in time. But it's hard to say that have only one source, because there's going to be multiples. But how do you best leverage what you have and get everybody utilizing it, so you have that transparency that you're talking about, Steve?
Yeah, and you have another question in the audience. What is the solution for a labor overrun and margin erosion on projects related to engineering? You have a group of inexperienced engineers. It's a constant pressure as a PM in the organization. That's a really good question. Obviously, one solution is get more engineers, right? But that's a real challenge. I think even in software, maybe you have experienced engineers, but people's expectations of what can be accomplished. Everyone wants to be positive, but then sometimes being realistic, for that. But Diane, do you have any suggestions for?
Well, I think we talked about it in maybe one of the past few months about being able to evaluate individuals and their own efficiencies as quicker, right? So if you're seeing that somebody's struggling a little bit, at what point in time do you escalate to go get that expert to help them, right? So I think in the short term, it's about the project manager really monitoring what was expected from those resources. How did they perform to their estimates that they gave you? Give them a handful of times to kind of try to make it happen. But there's a point that you have to say, wait a minute, don't let them overrun by, $20,000 before you act on it. Right. So you should be always monitoring trends, and you'll know whether or not people are struggling.
Well, I think that's where the time entry, like if you are a company, like we use time entry here. And we use it for two purposes, and everyone thinks, oh, we use it, one for billing for one, but secondarily, there's for the non-engineers, estimating is a big challenge. So if you know that your underestimating because you've logged your time. You say, okay, I think this task is going to take this person 20 hours, and then it takes them 30 or 40. Then you go back to the why, right? Why did it take 30 hours? Is it because I underestimated? Is it because this one engineer's skills need to be shored up? Or is it, why were they over? But I
Right.
think sometimes you don't even know that they are over because you're finding out, oh, we just delivered the whole thing late, but you don't have any statistics during the process. So if you do have your team, your estimate of your project plan in there, and then you also get your team to participate by telling you, well, how long it really took. And what we always tell our engineers is like, look, we're not big brother you here. We're using this to help monitor how the non-engineers, the ones doing the plans, how good are we actually at even estimating things. So
And for future projects too. The better, the better
that's
we
what I
can
mean. I
do
mean,
it.
you may not be able to fix it right now on this one project, but you can use the information from the one that you're overrunning on to maybe avoid it in the future. So maybe the answer is, hey, I need to tell my customer that there's going to just take a little bit more time, or we need more budget,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, to do that. And even sometimes I laughingly said, go get more engineers. Sometimes that not doesn't even help.
Right.
So
Right.
it's not all.
Mhm.
So getting back to Rodney's question, he's going to have to go back and look at it. Is it because their skill, they're not good enough yet? Then we need to get them some more training. And when we have our less skilled engineers, we need to know that there's more time. We just have to give them more time because
Yep.
it's not really their fault. So it gets back to, was it because we underbid, or is it because their skill? Is
Or
it
the
because,
requirements poor.
or
I mean,
are we
yeah.
distracting them with giving them too many tasks to do all at once?
Yeah.
That's the other gotcha sometimes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay,
All right. So
go
let's
on.
jump back. Okay. So there, as we've been talking, there's all kinds of alternatives to solving those problems, and we may need to make decisions on. And there's definitely pitfalls. What you don't want is people just being yes people, and just following one person, and everybody's going down that path. I've seen that before, and and if you see, the leaders in the organization not allowing for dissenting opinions or
Mhm.
other alternatives, that's a problem, right? So that's definitely a problem. So really, take the time to not to really try to not uh or I'm going to say that a different way. Take the time to make sure you are open to all the options that are out there and evaluate them all to the level that you can. And then the last thing, which is why we're here, is make a decision, right? So we've identified the problem. We identified what we want to be measured against. We've identified a whole bunch of different alternatives. We've made assessments on those alternatives, and we've agreed. We want to agree as to where we're going, and we're going to make that decision. And like I said earlier, that little flow of the steps for decision making can happen in a very short period of time, or it might happen in a long period of time, or just like an iterative agile kind of process, it could be happening 14 times in a 14-day window, like we're talking about with the Starliner. Make your decision based on listening to everyone and that getting towards consensus. Doesn't mean you have to have full consensus. Make sure you've considered everybody's ideas and push for some sort of agreement. What you really want is people that are agreeing, or that even if they don't agree, they're willing to support you. And then we're going to be making decisions all the time as project managers and project team members. So ones that are low risks, those are good. See the results. It kind of plays into the whole team building approach where you have the storming, forming, norming. I mean, when you first get together as a project team, being able to go through the process and making some small low risk decisions together and seeing the results of that and following that process is really important. And then making your decisions on the adequacy of the information. You may not have all the information, but you've got everything you think you can get. And
Yeah.
agree as a group that once we make these decisions and we document these decisions, we're going to execute on them. Because that's how we're going to get results. And if we don't make decisions, it goes nowhere, right?
Well, I think that getting back to the buy-in and all that's really important. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do sometimes. It just depends on your team, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But getting everybody to help, you don't want to be making a lone wolf decision and then have it backfire. And then everyone's going to be like, wait, that was your fault.
Right,
Which it is. As a project manager, you're responsible. But
but
the goal would be to get the consensus to help you know that you're making the right call.
Agreed. And there's times when I've seen it where like maybe I've pulled some data together. I know that it's not all my responsibility to make that decision because there might be other groups and other silos and things like that.
Well, sometimes it's not your decision at all. You just have to present the decision to the decision maker.
So you might have to bring it forth and present it in a way, and somebody might get defensive. Well, what are you making that decision? I'm not making that decision. I'm trying to get to a decision, and I'm trying to push people to make decisions. So that's a whole nother little dynamic of this process, because it may not be mine or my project team's decision to make. It may be the customer. It may be another group within the organization. And you got to be able to help them make decisions as well. And your decision might be wrong, or your recommendation might be wrong, but you're doing it with the best information you have. Yeah. You've gone through the process to kind of, done your due diligence to be able to successfully make decisions that impact the overall success of our project.
Right. I like the last one. Go back to that slide if you can.
Sure.
When you've made an error in your decision, go back and fix it right away. Acknowledge it. Say, hey, that wasn't the right call, and fix it, because the worst thing to do is double down on a bad decision.
Oh my God.
So
absolutely.
And I think it's in your culture of your company, it's really important. I mean, we're not talking, again, we're back to obviously the Starliner example, lot different game than most of us have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's important culturally in the organization to let everybody know that we're going to make decisions. Sometimes we're going to be wrong. Owning up to when you're wrong is a real big, I think it's a really good leadership skill to be able to say, hey, you know what? That was my mistake. I made the wrong call. We're going to adjust course and fix it. So those are some things that I think are really important when you are making decisions that people know, like, well, look, we're going to do the best we can. And sometimes we're going to be wrong and we're going to fix it right away.
Yeah, because we're all working in things that have unknowns, right? So, if everything was, definitive, then why do we have a job, right?
Right. And nobody's, you're not going to be perfect in your plan like that. It's real easy to get kind of caught up in trying to so hard to be 100% accurate all the time. Cut is, again, assuming we're not like
100% accurate
putting astronauts in life.
Are you really?
Anyway, we're ready. We're wrapping this up. So let's give everybody their certificates.
There we go. Awesome. This was great, guys. Thank you very much.
I think we're past that now. There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
Go ahead and get out your phone and you can get this scanned. We also did put this link in the chat as well. The idea, though, of kind of the unknown scaring people, like we were just talking about, was another one of the comments that we received, that being based in fear, right? If your environment is not safe for you to feel like you can do that, then yeah, it will be difficult, I think.
Awesome.
Please also join our upcoming PDUs. We will be, discussing risk. Personality tools is one we were talking about just a short time ago, and how excited we are about that. We do look forward to having you join the future webinars that we host. This one recording will be here for you to access. If you have any questions around how, you can even get really detailed and see how an engineering group is being overburdened, right? Whether that's any resource-based, Project Insight's a great answer. Please do reach out. We'd love to show you how we can make your work life easier, as that's our mission. And follow us on social. We really appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks, everybody.